Okay, let's do that one more time. Hello, I'm Jennifer Borland and the director of the Center for the Humanities, and happy to welcome you all today to listen to our great speakers. Um, if you are interested in any of the events or activities of the Center for the Humanities, I would just encourage you to go to our website or reach out to me via email. Maybe someone could pop that up in the chat, the link to the center. But I don't want to spend too much time because we have such a great panel of speakers, and I want to make sure that we have lots of time for them. So today we are going to hear from 6 new faculty members at Oklahoma State in the arts and humanities. This is the 4th year that we've hosted an event like this. And it was really created in order to both help new faculty feel connected to the campus, but also to help those of us on campus get to learn about what new people are bringing and what kind of research you're doing. So hopefully this will facilitate those kinds of connections. If we don't have a lot of time for Q&A at the end, I would just encourage you to reach out to anybody who you might be interested in learning more about. I think from that point of view, we're just going to get started. So we are going to go through our speakers alphabetically. And so Kathleen Burns will be our first speaker. And Kathleen is with American Studies with a 10-year home in English. So take it away, Kathleen.
Hi, everyone. It's lovely to see you. Feeling a little bit of whiplash. I just submitted my midterm grades. I probably shouldn't admit that right now because this is being recorded, but what are you going to do? Hi, just to tell you a little bit about myself. My work is kind of at the intersection of the environmental humanities, but also science studies, literary and cultural studies. And I do a lot of transdisciplinary work and interdisciplinary work. So this is really my pitch right now to be like, if you would like to be in a collaborative project or team teaching or a public humanities project, like come talk to me. That's why I'm here today. So if any of what I'm about to say interests you, please reach out. Okay, I'm gonna keep an eye on the time. Okay, so like my general research, like more traditional research, thinks about kind of like stories and material practices as they surround plants, and more specifically, kind of questions of plant animacy and how they underwrite kind of biological understandings of life and what constitutes the human. And so I'm really thinking about questions of like representational, but also the political power of plants. And so thinking about like how do plants kind of both discursively, but also kind of structurally animate conceptions of what it means to be alive in the world. And so I kind of look at discourses and representations of plant animacy across like science, literature, other forms of cultural objects like art, etc. And I look at the ways in which they can work to are weaponized, particularly in Western science, to naturalize gendered and racialized hierarchies that undergird the concept of the human. But I'm also really interested in the ways that like plants just like are in the world, right? And they're agential beings. And so even as like they're co-opted within like plantation economies and ideologies, they also disrupt them, right? They're unruly. So I also think about the ways in which they're drawn upon and often inspire kind of different modes of political and social models of like resistance and rebellion and rejuvenation. So my project kind of does it's a grab bag a little bit. But anyways, if you haven't guessed, I'm really interested in plants. So if that's also you, let me know. But just to say a little bit else, I have a lot of experience doing kind of team teaching and collaborative projects, interdisciplinary projects. So when I was at Duke University, I did these year-long projects with undergraduates, graduate students, postdocs, and faculty in the sciences, social sciences, humanities. And we all worked together to kind of study a larger issue. And like we produced everything from like a report that we gave to state legislatures to a podcast, right? So we worked on different kind of modalities and aspects. So those are things that I've done and managed and kind of worked on. So if any of that sounds like up your alley, let me know. And then lastly, I know I have like 1 minute left, which is that I want to start this project called the Agricultural Legacies and Environmental Futures of Public Land Grant Universities. And so this will think about kind of colonial legacies of land grant institutions at OSU, right? Thinking about Langston University, et cetera. But also kind of like thinking about like what is the really exceptional work and exciting and inspiring work that's being done at places like OSU and elsewhere. I would love to do things that are place-based, right? That are engaging with the community, that are engaging with local experts. And this would be kind of like place-based learning, as well as like bringing in speakers and experts from sciences to humanities and social sciences that work on these topics. So to have a kind of like speaker series that get scientists in the room about thinking about these kinds of questions, right? Like bring in this distinguished scientist. And then also like, why don't we go think about like seed sovereignty? So anyways, I'm really excited about this project and I think there's a lot of potential for collaborations. I think that's my time. So anyways, thanks y'all.
Awesome. Thank you, Kathleen. I'm actually going to ask one really quick question, which is, can you just, because I think we're doing fine with time, if you could say like how you are sort of, what's the scope of that project? Are you like just trying to find people right now? Should people come and
Yeah,
talk with you?
that's
Are you like, is this like a 5 year thing that you're thinking? Like, sort of what, can you say a little bit more about that aspect of it?
of course. This is something I dreamed up a few months ago.
Okay.
Obviously, funding is a big question, right? A big question mark. But I think right now, as I work to do kind of transdisciplinary work, my model is that like you have to start with a core group of excited folks who are like engaged and invested in working together to develop a project. So this is like a kernel of an idea, and I want to build a community around it. But that like it can evolve and grow as other folks like insights and expertise like come into the project. And then of course with like funding, but this particular like segment of the project would probably be a year long or so, but that I eventually imagine would go on to have like other instantiations. That's the goal, right? Like how can we build collaborations within kind of other community networks. So the goal is to like have this kind of thing that's a little bit more attached to the institution to build kind of larger interest across colleges, across departments, right? So the goal right now is to build community. And then once we have that, like a core group of committed folks who are interested in some of these ideas, then it's like figuring out like this is the larger project we want to do. So does that make sense? Basically, this segment of like the speaker series, place-based learning, et cetera, engagement with student farm, other community organizations is basically about building community because I can't do this work alone, right? And I'm new. This is new faculty, so it's only my second semester. So this is like, how can we get everybody in the room? Because I never see agricultural science folks, right? So that this is kind of part of that goal. And obviously, like sorry, I don't mean to talk too much, but the commitment can really vary, right? You can say like, oh, I'm really interested in like being part of this speaker series, but maybe not part of whatever, right? So I think there's also a kind of flexibility. But what I'm looking for is, so when I've done kind of previous work at Duke University with like Duke Forest, just do you want me to talk more or less? I can stop. Okay, so when I
We
did
have
this
one
at
more minute. How's that?
1 more minute. Okay, so when
Yeah.
I did this at Duke University, for example, about Duke Forest, I started with a few other graduate students, also a graduate student in the sciences. We worked together to think about the plantation and sharecropping legacies of Duke Forest, but then we got grant, like we worked together to get grant money. And then it was like how we then got a huge group of faculty and other grad students excited about it. And then we got an even bigger grant, and then we designed a project together. So like that's the kind of thing that I can envision doing at OSU. So anyways, if any of that sounds interesting, please reach out. I'd love to hear from you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, let's see. Our next speaker is Stephanie Choi from the English department.
Okay, I do have a couple slides, so I will share
Okay.
those kind of unceremoniously. I'm not going to put it on presenter view. I'll just keep it like this. Hopefully that's okay for everyone. But it's nice to meet you all. I know several of you in the room already. So I am a poet. So my primary research is myself historically, but currently I am working on a project that involves more outside research. And so my poetry manuscript in progress is called Maiden Voyage. And Maiden Voyage is rooted in the practice of documentary poetics, which some of you might be familiar with. It is similar to documentary film, which, everyone should be familiar with. Documentary poetics might be described as a mode of writing that is specifically concerned with socio-political issues and history. It often engages with research and archival methods to produce original poetry. So often these texts use government and other kinds of public documents as its material. So it'll start with some type of legislation, and then it will often push the boundaries of that and lyrically intervene with that text. So it's often thinking about kind of the liminal space between poetry and nonfiction, and kind of how to trouble the archive in many ways. One of the seminal texts is Muriel Rukeyser's The Book of the Dead, which was published in 1938, and it is about the Hawk's Nest disaster in West Virginia, which was a Depression-era hydroelectric dam project, which resulted in many of the workers developing silicosis, a deadly lung disease. So Muriel Rukeyser at the time was actually working for a newspaper in New York City, but kind of as a poet and as a journalist, she decided to go out to West Virginia and she interviewed a lot of the victims and their families. So a lot of that material is in the book, as well as language from the testimony that was submitted to Congress about the disaster, in addition to her own poems, kind of about the process of going there and her own reflections on on the country and on the disaster specifically. So it's kind of stitched together as a book length narrative poem. So this is one of the texts that really established the field. A couple contemporary examples are Citizen by Claudia Rankine and then West by Paisley Rechtel. So I won't summarize this too much, but they might be texts that you're familiar with as well. So for my own project, it involves kind of three different strands. The first strand looks into the history of Polly Bemis, who was a Chinese woman who was smuggled into the U.S. in 1872 to work as pretty much an indentured servant in mining camps in Idaho. I actually learned about Polly through a painting by the artist Hung Liu, which is on the right. This painting was in an exhibit called Many Wests, which was traveling the country for a while. I saw it at the University of Utah when I was a graduate student there. And so the painting is what struck me first, and that's how I learned about her. She actually is pretty well documented in the archive, but she's never speaking herself. People have interviewed her and people wrote about her. And the most actually interesting part is that she eventually earned her freedom. She married a white saloon owner in Warren, Idaho, and they moved to the Salmon River and just became frontiers people and for the rest of their lives. They had a neighbor, Charlie Shep, who kept a ranch log. So a lot of what's documented about Polly's life is in this ranch log that you can find in the University of Idaho State Archives or University of Idaho Archives and some in the state archives as well. So part of my research is turning all of that into poetic material. And a lot of my work at the moment is kind of writing into Polly's voice in the form of persona poems. So I write from her perspective as a kind of intervention, since she does not represent herself in the archive that we have. So that is one strand. The second strand is the 8 Chinese men who were aboard Titanic. This is also pretty well known now because there was a documentary film about the 6 who survived. So my work is similar in this mode, where I'm trying to write persona poems into their voices that were lost. One interesting connection that I have is that one of the survivors, Fong Lang, is actually buried in the same cemetery as my grandfather in Chicago. So all 6 of the men never disembarked in America, and they were never meant to. They were actually on their way to Cuba to work on the banana boats. They were being sent by their like British employer. And so they never disembarked in America. They go on to Cuba, but the documentary was able to trace Fong Lang back to America. He ended up coming back in 1920, 8 years after the wreck. And he settled in Chicago's Chinatown, which is also where my family immigrated when they immigrated to America. So that's kind of the personal connection. Often documentary projects will intervene in a personal way as well, right? So you're thinking about kind of at what distance do you stand from the material that you're engaging with. And so that was an interesting connection that I found. So the third connection, or the third piece of the book, then writes into that and writes into my own kind of lost figure. So my maternal grandfather immigrated to the US in 1935 as a paper son. And he died when I was 5. So he's the grandparent that I know that I interacted with the least and that I don't know much about, because he never, every time I would ask my mom about it, she would just say that he never really talked about his life or his past. So he's a figure that I'm also writing into to kind of connect to the other strands as kind of lost figures in the public archive and then in my own personal archive as well. My grandfather served in World War II, but this is also something that he didn't really like to talk about, and he actually like threw away all of his army medals and all of this stuff. So part of my process in researching him is trying to recover some of the documents and materials of his life. I was able to find his immigration interview actually from 1935 to immigrate into the US, which is an interesting document to find because everything he recounts is not the story of his actual life. Since he immigrated as a paper son, he had to learn someone else's story in order to enter. So I'm working with that document, and the hope is to translate that into some type of poetic material. So the book is still kind of in its nascent stages, even though I've written quite a bit into the Polly section and the Titanic section. I've not written a lot into my own personal section, but hopefully it will develop in time. But yeah, that's all. Thank you. Sorry for going a little long.
Thank you so much. All right, we are going to keep trucking along here. Our next speaker is JJ Compton, comes to us from the OSU Library.
I also have a presentation, and I'm going to do the same kind of thing. So
Perfect.
can you see it okay?
Yep.
Okay. So just to start with, the title, The Resilient Workforce of Oklahoma's Archivists, is the title of my thesis. You mentioned that I'm in the library. I am the Assistant Department Head of Special Collections and University Archives. I'm an archivist by training and by profession for the last 20 years. I'm coming to OSU from a small private academic library where I did half-time cataloging and half-time archival work. So to tell you a little bit more about, and I'm saying thesis because I'm getting it from a Welsh school. They call it thesis instead of dissertation. I know that's a little confusing, but I'm used to referring to it as my thesis. So to start with, I just want to tell you a little bit about what my research area is in. So what I look at for archives is how institutional memory and organizational culture impact the archivist, and then reciprocally how the archivist impacts the organizations. In specific, I look at workforce transitions, Oklahoma as its own socio subculture, and then grassroots organizing, how we band together as archivists to support the profession within the state. Um, I also look at the shift in archival theory and its impact in archivists. So how different groups of archivists throughout their professional career approach archival theory. Um, what my thesis, I'm hoping eventually to get it published, will be kind of a tool for advocacy for the profession and how to grassroots organize within a state. There's a lot of states that have no archival organization, and we started the Oklahoma Archivists Association back in 2017 as kind of a way for us to connect with each other across our state. Lots of times we look to regional organizations or national organizations for how to network within the profession, but this really is kind of a case study on how to organize within your own socio subculture of your state. Another thing that I look at is how can this thesis be used as a tool for advocacy for the profession? With workforce transitions, I look a lot at Oklahoma's traditionally politically conservative environment and how funding occurs within that environment and how we can advocate for non-temporary positions, for employees not to be furloughed, and then examine what that does to the historical record when those kind of workforce transitions occur. I used oral history throughout my thesis. So primarily I interviewed retired or retiring late career archivists and looked at what they remember throughout their career and the legacy they hope to leave on the state. But then I kind of cross-pollinate that with some new and emerging professionals and mid-career professionals to see kind of how those archival theories and practices have changed over the course of a career. So that's kind of my thesis in a nutshell. I put this slide up. Nobody knows what I do until I don't do it, right? We've seen a lot of changes in the archival profession recently with the Doge and people being let go or fired or retiring early. And I think that I'm hoping that people are beginning to look at what that will do to the profession and to the historical record nationally as well. So this is obviously just a first case study. And then this third slide is really kind of just a thank you for inviting me into this conversation, because throughout all my research, Michelle Casewell in particular said it best that lots of times there isn't a lot of interdisciplinary talking with archivists and other disciplines, even though we look to other disciplines kind of to base our archival thinking and ground us, but we don't necessarily do well with talking to them and learning from them both ways. And so I kind of see this as a very good step that we're talking to each other and getting out of the archive and really interacting with other colleagues. So short and sweet. It's, if you have questions, I'd be more than happy to talk to you about Oklahoma archivists in particular, but lots of other archival things I could answer for you as well. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
No problem.
I think it's so important for all of us in the arts and humanities to be connected to our amazing library colleagues, including Coursera, who's here as a representation of the oral history program. And yes, we just love the library here. So I'm very happy to have you part of that. Okay, let's keep moving along. Our next speaker is Nijal Munankarmi, who is a new graphic design faculty member in the Department of Art, Graphic Design, and Art History.
Yes, so hello everyone.
Oops, I didn't mean to mute you. Sorry, I'm trying to
There you
pin
go.
you and hit the wrong button. There you go.
All right, there you go. Yeah, so I also have a few slides to show. So let me just share my screen. Oh, it's asking me to quit, but can I send a file here so someone could open it?
We can do
Um,
that, or you should be able to share your screen if you want.
Yeah, it's asking me to quit. Yeah, it's asking me to quit Zoom and get back in
Okay.
again. So
Okay, yeah. If you want to email me something, I'll try to get it up for you.
yeah, it should be in the chat just about now. Um, there you go. Sorry about that. So yeah, just while it's opening, so I am originally from Nepal, and most of my research is just about my own culture. While I was doing my grad studies, I wanted to do something that involves like United States, and that got me thinking about working with the Native American culture to uh, like progress their conservation efforts. But while I was talking to one of the professors over at UT Arlington, she was like, "Hey, why don't you do something about your own? Like, you must have something, some sort of historical background that needs to be brought open into the world." So I went back to my roots, and I started researching about my own history. Um, so if we go on to the next slide,
Sorry, here, I think.
all right. So my main research is in the topic of revitalizing the Newari language, a contemporary approach through typography design. So Newari language, so we come from the Kathmandu Valley, and we are called Newars, and we are one of the indigenous groups of people who originally inhabit the capital city, but due to a lot of you know retrogression and a lot of like governmental laws and regulations, we had to bear a lot of um, that something from the government. So we had to lose a lot of our culture and a lot of our language. Uh, but nowadays there are many people from Newar community that are trying to work to revitalize the language and not lose it. Uh, Personally speaking, I can't speak Newari language, even though it's my parents speak that language. I can understand it. Through my research, I'm starting to learn how to read and how to write, but there are so many others who don't have that kind of facility. So I'm trying to get the new generation of Newari people to be interested in preserving the language, the cultural heritage, the arts and architecture. So next slide, you'll see a typical Newari like festival, and we are so big in festivals. There are a lot of food, a lot of drinks sometimes, but we are very proud of who we are as a community. So through typography design, I wanted to revitalize the language, the Newari language. So through my research, I figured out uh, the original language that was first seen in Tibetan manuscript in 5th century. but only was seen in Newari culture during 1500s. So that language is very complex to understand for a newer generation. So my solution was to create to bridge the gap between traditional Newari language to a more modern, maybe similar to English language or even Nepalese language, which we as Nepali-born citizens are required to take in schools. So I wanted to bridge the gap between Newari language and Devanagari language or Devanagari script. So most of my designs are based upon both of these languages. Next slide shows my development of that language. Before it used to be a lot of like curves, a lot of circular structures, but I wanted to create something very simple and very solid. So this is my solution to create a new font, and it would be just the third ever built-in font for designers or for people to use on a computer. So I wanted to create a vast alphabets of Newari letters, Newari characters, Newari symbols, and glyphs for people to use. This is still an ongoing project. There are more. I'm trying to create like a bunch of posters, and I'm trying to get people aware of what Newari language consists of. So if you slide down more, there's going to be a lot of work done, like a lot of I would say representation of that font in a sentence structure. I called it Nugu Newa, which translates to new Newari in English. And there is still a lot of work to be done. So if you can slide down, just a few representation of that use. So Mepinta Daya Luju means be kind to others. So there's a lot of like connection between typography design and also language and anthropology, maybe. So there's a lot of like collaboration, chances or potential with this whole project. If you go to the next slide. So these are a few, again, letters, and there's going to be thousands of more. So it's a very long project that I'm trying to, get going. Next slide. And Newari language is not just about going from left to right. We also go from top to bottom. So it's very complex language, and I'm trying to learn while I'm developing this typeface. If you go on to the next slide, it involves a lot more. So I do a lot of illustrations as well, but based on Newari community. So right now I'm one of this is a project about the life of a woman in Newari community, like what she has to do from the day she is brought into this world up to the day she is taken away from this world. So in Newari, women go through a lot in their lifetime. So I'm trying to illustrate that life cycle through illustrations. Another project that I'm working on in the next slide, it's a continuation of that. Another slide. So not just Newari culture, but I'm trying to work with something different. So right now we have so much going on in the world right now. So I'm trying to get into a project where I talk about rights of minorities as well. So social justice campaign is also another research topic that I'm very interested in. Right now I'm trying to create some sort of illustration catalog of working towards the rights of LGBTQ, working towards the right of minorities, and also like different activist work as well. I'm also trying to read this book, which is the Gods and Masks of Kathmandu Valley. So I'm trying to create an archive of masks that are being used in Newari culture because we don't have an archive, a digital archive of this type of arts and architecture. So I'm trying to create a digital architecture using artificial intelligence as well as AR technologies and VR to create something that can be used by anybody, anywhere in the world. So yeah, and the last slide is another project of mine, where I'm trying to create illustrations based on the front of different cities. So right now I'm working with the storefront or city front of a Japanese rural area. But my next project based on the same concept is to create archive of different temples and different monuments in Kathmandu Valley. So yeah, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much. Okay, and our next speaker is Nicole Tracy Ventura from English.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. I'm really happy to be here and to meet all of you. I'm an applied linguist in the English department, and typically I've worked in languages departments, but I come from West Virginia University, where maybe you heard the news last year that the languages department was eliminated. So I was quite happy to find a home here. And, as a linguist, we don't always fit in with the humanities, but, I think we're on the cusp. So thank you for including me, and always happy to hear the great work that people are doing. So I'm a second language acquisition specialist. So, oops. Oh, okay. So I do a lot of longitudinal research on people learning second languages. Most of the languages I focus on are English, French, and Spanish, but I've collaborated on studies of people learning Korean too. Not that I speak Korean, but I've added some other expertise. And recently I've been more interested in the long-term retention of second languages. So particularly like in English speakers, we finish our degrees in a foreign language, and sometimes we get jobs using that language and sometimes we don't. So I'm interested in what happens to those language skills if people stop utilizing them regularly. So that's a project so I have this longitudinal project I've been doing for about 11 years, but I'm interested in starting something here too, looking at students who finish their languages degree here. So starting get to know more of the people from the languages department. I remember meeting Rebecca briefly at orientation. But also an area of my research is the benefits of study abroad. So I originally got interested in that because of the language learning potential. But once you start studying people in that experience, you learn there's so many other benefits, right? I mean, I also have been through study abroad too, so I know it personally, but it's wonderful to hear people talk about it and how it changes their life. Most people have a very positive experience. So I'm interested in not just the linguistic benefits, but the personal and the professional and the social benefits, and how characteristics of study abroad programs can impact those in different ways. Because nowadays, a lot of people go for very short amounts of time versus, longer stays. I was abroad for a whole year, and the benefits you get are quite different if you go for a year compared to 2 weeks. But a lot of students can't afford to go for a long time. So there's also they also get something out of going for 2 weeks. So anybody here who's interested in needing some motivation to start a study abroad program, I'd be happy to talk to you. We're talking about it in the English department, perhaps next spring break, a year from now, taking a trip to Belize. I took students there last year on like a multilingualism trip. Belize is a really beautiful country, and you know, English is an official language, but you hear so many other languages there. It's very multicultural. And, you know, because of it being a colony, the British colony, you know, you see people from a lot of different races, and it was a really positive experience for our group to go there. So yeah, so if anybody, you know, if you're like starting to think about it, I'd be happy to like talk to you and try to give you all the positive reasons why you should do it, because I think it's a lot of work for faculty, but it also can be incredibly fun. So what else? I'm also interested in community-based English as a second language programs. And so, you know, trying to figure out what's happening here in Oklahoma. And so many of us have talked about the political climate. And that's something I care a lot about too, and is making sure that people are still going to receive services that they need. So yeah, I think I can finish there. I always have lots of ideas too. But happy to meet with anybody anytime, looking for friends too. So if you want to go out for a drink, let me know. Or a coffee too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicole. Okay, and we have one more speaker, and then if we have a little bit of time after that, we can certainly talk about any of the different presentations or ask questions. But our last speaker today is actually from Languages and Literatures, Rebecca Stewart-Gray.
Hello, and yes, we are very grateful for the work that you do. So we, of course, always want to encourage students to study abroad. And I think that, especially Nicole, what you're focusing on, not only the linguistic benefits of study abroad, but also those personal and professional development opportunities, and also self-confidence building opportunities that happen in study abroad programs. Especially, I saw in the chat that you did work on first-generation students studying abroad. Well, that's also myself. That is one of the places where I grew professionally and personally. That's not at all my research field, but I'm very grateful that you're doing it. I am a professor of German, but our assistant professor of German, of course, but I am also a musicologist. I just want to put that out there in case anyone is interested in working with musicologists. Specifically right now, I focus on 18th century opera and drama, representation of gender and racialization on the 18th century stage in the wake of the French Revolution in particular, and Napoleonic invasions of German-speaking places, and then also early 20th century suppressed composers. But that is not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking a little bit, I just want to introduce a little bit of a project that is really taking up the most of my focus these days. And this fits into my broader research interests in general, which are, I think, really centered around 2 century-spanning inquiries, which are recovering the voices of lesser-known artists who have been neglected by scholarship and by popular audiences, in particular due to racist and xenophobic aesthetics, and also interrogating masculinist and hegemonic approaches to canonical authors, seeing what canonical texts have to bear for us today when read through a contemporary, critical, and feminist lens. I've always, or at least since I started graduate school and first read the works of the drama about who, or rather the dramatist about whom I'd like to speak, I've always been struck how in Friedrich Schiller's dramas, tragic figures stand up to systems of constraints enforced by the most privileged in an effort to maintain autonomy. How, for example, in the drama Intrigue and Love, the women figures Louisa Miller and Lady Milford self-assuredly resist the pressures of psychological abuse and sexual violence, refusing to obey the patriarchs who consumed them. In his massively influential take on the historical tragedy of Mary, Queen of Scots, I find the story of a political refugee who sought the healing care of a cousin, but who was met with masculinist suspicion and hatred of her vulnerability. Nevertheless, she resists the political violence to which she is subjected to the best of her ability, and finds the capacity to forgive her cousin murderer, whom she had so wanted to love. My current research thus centers around the underdogs in an otherwise very canonical oeuvre, the vulnerable figures. Schiller, by the way, if you don't know the name, he's like the German Shakespeare, so very canonical oeuvre. I'm particularly interested in the vulnerable figures who receive comparatively little scholarly attention, or who, when they do, they are not usually considered the prototypical Schillerian hero in the scholarship. I argue that in Schiller's works, it is precisely vulnerability that makes the tragic hero, and that Schiller's famous concept of what he calls the sublime champions vulnerability. When I talk about Schiller's sublime, I'm not referring to glaciers, waterfalls, and elks, but rather a very specific feeling that we have probably all experienced before at some point, perhaps in the theater or just at the movies. It's what Schiller calls a mixed feeling because it contains both pain and pleasure. The sublime is a feeling that we experience as spectators when we observe the portrayal of another human being who is threatened with very extreme suffering, perhaps the pain of death or the threatened loss of a loved one, and who nevertheless finds a means of resisting the threat and defiantly pursuing some independent goal in the face of the threat instead of backing down and accepting coercion. This is the stuff of all of our favorite movies. For example, when at the end of Ridley Scott's Thelma and Louise, the two protagonists are faced with either turning themselves into the police and being tried in Texas, where they know that they are sure to be thrown in jail to rot for daring to defend themselves against sexual violence, they decide instead to continue their highly illegal joyride and drive straight off a cliff. Their last free, tragically free act. Schiller has a term for this kind of moment in drama, entsetzliche Freiheit, or terrible freedom, a freedom that is purchased too dearly, and unnecessarily so, and always because some tyrant or tyrannical social force has thrust the protagonist into the situation of having to choose between personal autonomy and life. Schiller is clear that the sublime is a feeling, and not something that we should ever desire to witness outside of the curated and safe space that is the arts, or in his case, specifically the theater. But as Schiller's historical dramas aimed to show in his time and continue to remind audiences today, stories like those in his tragedies happen all the time in the real world. Those who are arbitrarily made vulnerable are constantly being forced into coercive situations and into having to make the impossible choice between life and freedom. Therefore, what my research does is it takes us away from antiquated notions like the sublime and the beautiful soul and the limits of what those terms mean and what they could have meant in their origin. It's not about men riding horses valiantly or women dropping handkerchiefs. And instead, my research repoliticizes Schiller's women figures and his presentation of gender, and to a limited degree of racialization, against the backdrop of a reading of Schiller's concept of humanity itself considered as constitutively vulnerable. Schiller's concept of the sublime is not only interesting for us today because we see it at work all the time in historical drama, in opera, in film, but also because it is a dramaturgical technique that, when co-opted, is ripe with abuse. The history of the sublime is also the figure who defies the history of the sublime is also the history of politicians who have co-opted the figure of the sublime, the vulnerable figure who defies the odds and resists violence, staging themselves as victims, while the actual victims, be they who they might be, and labeled with whatever they are labeled with, they are positioned as the evil, scary aggressors. And it is a dramaturgical principle that has been quite effective for some. So it is important to me to be able to articulate what the sublime is and what it is not, and how it looks when it is abused. And I'll just close by paraphrasing Schiller, that when reality starts to resemble the tragedies on the stage too much, that is a signal to us that abuses are occurring. That's all.
Thank you so much. Oh, right. We have a few minutes left at the end of our hour. Does anyone have any questions or would like to have someone say a little bit more about their work or talk about some connections? It's really open to everyone who's here. Any questions that folks have?
I have a question for Nicole. Do you do any studies on study away in addition to study abroad? Because I frequently I lead study away intensive language immersion programs in the United States. And it's particularly popular among students who can't afford to study abroad, or for whatever reason, they don't see it in their future. Maybe they'll go and do that later, which is what happened in my case. Yeah, are you interested in that at all?
Yeah, yeah, I have not done research on that, but I think it's a great topic too. And in the study abroad literature, I haven't seen people talk about that as much, for us in the US, because the US is so big, right? And it is really diverse. You can give students that really impactful experience too. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about what you're doing. Where are you taking them?
Well, I teach at this German Summer School of the Pacific is what it's called. It's at Portland State. And it was founded by a German who left Germany right at the time of Hitler's rise to protest fascism. And it's a strong institution, and it's facing all the usual troubles that, as you well know, language programs are facing, but it's a really powerful experience, and I call it the major maker because the students come back and declare majors.
Any other questions for our speakers or opportunities that you would like to remind people about? I did throw a handful of things in the chat as we were going, both about our fellows group program, just to keep people on board with that. And also, since transdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary research has been a topic, the opportunity for people to do this workshop that College of Arts and Science is developing. So I put that link in there as well, just to make sure, I mean, first year new faculty members don't necessarily want to jump into any of these projects, but just to be aware that you're aware of them, I think can be really helpful. Anyone else? Priscilla, I see your hand wiggling.
I do
Yes.
have a question, but I just wanted to say very quickly, thank you, Jennifer, for holding this. I've attended another one last year. It's really enjoyable. I've been at OSU for about 50,000 years, and I'm also in the art history department, and it's so enjoyable to have this event, to be able to meet all of you folks, to hear what you're doing. I took notes on everybody. It's just really exciting, and also what was unusual to find how much of everybody's work had something to do with each other's in some way or form. I mean, it was great. So it was just, I wanted to give a really big thank you to everyone, and also Jennifer for holding this too. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
It is my pleasure. I love hearing about new faculty and their work. And, I'm just as the director of the center, and speaking of many years, I'm in my 18th year at OSU. So I'm just really, excited to have always new ideas coming with new people. But I also am, kind of part of the welcome committee in the sense that I want the Center for the Humanities, which hasn't been around for too many years, to be part of the kind of community building opportunities that we have here for new faculty, and to help make your transition to a new institution as successful as possible. So if there's anything that anyone needs that the center can help with, as you move forward through these early years of your time here, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And this goes for people who are attending our talk today and our speakers, but really anyone. We want the center to be facilitating exactly the kinds of shared ideas and collaboration that many of you talked about. So I guess that's maybe a good point on which to end. So I think that unless we have any lingering questions, we can wrap up. I'll just remind everyone that we will have this recorded and posted in our event archive. So if there's anyone who you know wasn't able to be here today, you can send it to them. You can take a look at past events that we've had. But again, I just want to say thanks to everyone for being here, and especially to our speakers for sharing a little bit about their work. And welcome to OSU.
Yes,
Thank you so much for doing this.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Lovely to meet you
Bye.
all.